Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a combined episode. What do you mean, combined episode? Well, we're recording on the Monday night after the Dutch Grand Prix, where we saw all of our predictions shattered badly, apart from one of us. And that I can see the smug on their face. We'll tell you who that is in a second. But this is also going to be a preview of the Italian Grand Prix, because in our normal Italian GP preview slot, we're going to have a very special guest appear on the podcast instead. And so we thought, okay, why don't we put two into one and leave that episode aside for that really interesting guest who has been on the podcast before, who has a few very controversial and interesting opinions before. We just won't tell you who it is. Could be a lot, because we've had a lot of guests on this podcast. But here's the reason why this episode is delayed. First up, there is a smug in my face. We have to flex this. All three of us were on national TV respectively talking about motorsport. Kunal in Norway talking about Formula One on the Viaplay broadcasts for the Dutch Grand Prix, and Sundaram and myself together on the Indian Racing League broadcast on Star Sports and Fan Code in India, discussing the action over there. Well, interesting, right? It's all of us back together after TV, now on the podcast. And hey, fun fact, the Inside Line F1 podcast was also name dropped on Star Sports and Fan Code during the Indian Racing League broadcast. So
Ooh.
this is a good place to be, isn't it, Kunal?
Yeah, this is news to me, so please deliver it to me live.
No, we did that. And even though it was meant to be an Indian motorsport broadcast, we had quite a few good drivers there. So Neil Jani, John Lancaster, someone who's raced in GP2, Formula 2, lots of good names there. But this is not what we're meant to talk about. That will be a separate story which you can find on those broadcasts. Today we're talking about Formula 1. And we're in this weird space, Kunal, where you have to be the shepherd guiding us, because Sundaram and I only got to watch the race in parts after our flights last night. How have McLaren toppled Red Bull Racing at their own perch and beat them by 22 seconds? Tell us.
1 second. Before we go there, what was the name drop? My mind can't move on from that.
Oh, so I basically had to say it's half of the Inside Line F1 podcast on the TV today. And that is a proud moment for me. Yeah. And it must have been for all of us as well, now that we're getting to discuss it for the first time. Yeah, that is good.
That's the moment during the whole shoot where I was smiling the widest, because I wasn't expecting Somal to say that, but then he dropped and mentioned it that, we are part of the Inside Line F1 podcast. And yeah, I was smiling the widest at that point.
Hey, that's the last thing they should be angry about, because I ended up butchering the sponsor's name totally. If there's anything for them to be pissed off about, that is that. So Kingfisher Power Soda, here's your mention on the Inside Line F1 podcast. The one I missed out on the first day. But no, Formula 1, Kunal. Here we are now.
Here we are. 22 seconds, I think.
Yeah.
The easiest way to put it is Zandvoort and the circuit characteristics were best suited to that McLaren. It's long winding corners, mostly of the slow to medium to medium speed corners, if you were to just generalize that. So the corner ranges were all within that sweet spot that McLaren absolutely loved. That's the first reason. And the second reason is that after Miami, Zandvoort is that second time only in the year that they brought an upgrade, focusing on adding more performance. Okay. Between Miami and Zandvoort, what they did was they just kept extracting more and more by fine-tuning their setup, making, small but very steady changes to the car and understanding what it was like. And then they waited till they were very sure about bringing these, upgrades that changed the whole car, so to say, and brought it even more so in the Red Bull territory. And I know you said this is also the Monza preview. Red Bull, with their high speed, straight line speed efficiency, now have a match in McLaren, because McLaren has also introduced a rear wing which produces as much efficiency. So these are the two reasons. Just the circuit characteristics working fantastically well, and McLaren being just so confident of the upgrades that they keep bringing to their car since last year, Austria last year, if we remember.
And then no other team comes to my mind that has delivered with their upgrades with so much of effect. I mean, probably they should send a couple of engineers, or Aston Martin should probably poach a couple of engineers from McLaren on how to efficiently make your upgrades work, because that team has been struggling there in that aspect. But every time McLaren comes with upgrades, they always tend to deliver. And that's great to see, considering where McLaren were at the start of last year, at the back of the grid. And they bring in upgrades, and it always tends to deliver. That's one very good thing that McLaren's that's been happening the last year.
And since you speak of last year, they had a management change last year, leadership change. James Key, who actually who made McLaren quick enough in the hands of Lando Norris and even Carlos Sainz, and sort of got them out of the dumps after their McLaren Honda days, moved to Sauber with Andreas Seidel. I keep forgetting Andreas Stella and Andreas Seidel, right? Mm-hmm. And then Andreas Stella was, promoted as being team principal. They have this three technical director sort of approach to extract more and more out of, get more creativity when it comes to their Formula One car solutions, because that's what eventually they do. They have car solutions that make the car go quicker. So the team has actually been very, very new as well in this role, and they have had that sort of recovery, which should make the likes of Mercedes and Ferrari sit back and notice, saying, what have they done, and what do they continuously keep doing that we are unable to do? Because every single one of us thought, that's it, this rules era, 22, 23, 24, 25, 4 world titles in the pocket for Max Verstappen. And all it took was one race win in Zandvoort, 22 point whatever seconds, for people to now ask, could Max lose this championship with a 70-point margin in the Drivers' Championship? I think it's all being played up as it should be. I think this is going to be Max. But 2025, if it's Max Verstappen again, my goodness, that's going to be a bonkers of a season.
But I believe we're in a bit of a sliding doors moment with this, because McLaren have won before, twice, once with Piastri, once with Norris, but never with this margin, never with this style, with this dominant fashion that they have displayed in Zandvoort. 22 seconds is a lot. Red Bull have won here for the past 3 seasons and won by some margin. To do this and to be that good, and we saw that track dominance graphic as well sometime in qualifying, where it was 3/4 of the circuit dominated by Lando Norris, 1/4 by Max Verstappen. It's a telling story. Beating them at their home perch where they've been so good is one thing, but to do it by this margin establishes that McLaren are not just good by fluke. And this is where I feel that McLaren may or may not win this season, but this may represent the start of the point where they're now equals, because they are equally as good at most circuits as Red Bull Racing are, and there are some where they're just much clearly better. I'm so excited for Monza now, Kunal, because in theory, that's Red Bull's home turf. Last 2 wins were won by them. McLaren only finished 9th and 12th there in last year's race. But now with their new rear wing, now with their car working better, it could be the second last frontier for them before Mexico City.
I just disagree with one of your many statements you made. I don't think McLaren are on equal footing to Red Bull. I think they are a step ahead. They've taken a very definitive step ahead. They own that. They lead that pecking order. To give an example, you say, Red Bull, frankly, given how they went in 2023, pretty much every circuit was their own, right? There was no circuit apart from Singapore that we remember them to have not been comfortable at. Red Bull here were doing all the chasing. From being the one who was being chased, they were doing all the chasing. And then they employed some of the tricks that McLaren was forced to employ earlier part of the season. Typically, you try a different tire strategy. Max Verstappen had 2 hards. McLaren drivers had the 2 medium tires. So they were trying to split that because you're trying to do all the chasing. Even more importantly, Max Verstappen, wrongly so, but confirmed by the team and Christian Horner, took on more wing than that was needed in the race, which is why when Lando Norris came chasing, Max Verstappen didn't even bother to respond to him, because Max just didn't have that straight line speed advantage, right? And if you remember, it was so many races, if Max was out of position, he just had the car to drive past everyone. This time it was Lando Norris. He, again, despite having a short run to T1, missed out yet 6th time that he's been started from pole and managed to lose a position on the opening lap. right? Uh, it didn't matter. He's still. I mean, nobody's talking of that not false, but that bad start by Norris because he
I
drove
am.
such a great race. The
I am.
71 and a half laps were fantastic. But yes, let's talk about that start.
Yeah, we have to. We have to. Wait. Uh, do we want to go to the bashing bit so early? Okay, let's just put it out there. Yeah, that's another one of those starts that didn't go very well. Hungary comes to mind, Belgium comes to mind, Spain comes to mind, Qatar last year comes to mind. There's a lot. I have a full list that I've made. I'll share it to you some point later. But I feel that's the only part where Lando didn't drive like Max. Because otherwise, it's a world champion's drive, wasn't it? Putting it on pole and qualifying with that margin, even stealing Max's line by saying simply lovely at the very end, and being very relentless and being very harsh to Lewis Hamilton by stealing his fastest lap attempt on the last lap. That's a very Max thing to do by Lando.
That is, and there was a Lewis Hamilton factor in that as well. Lewis had the fastest lap. I think Lewis lost the fastest lap by half a tenth. Okay, so that's how close it was. But it was on he was on 44 lap old hard tires, Lando Norris. So there was a Lewis Hamilton numerologic connect out there for all the Hamilton fans. But you're right. I think Norris just drove a race his most dominant in terms of time, in terms of performance, all of that. But why don't we break down that start? Because is there something that's wrong inherently with the McLaren when it comes to the starts? Or is there something that's just inherently wrong or lacking in Lando Norris when it comes to the starts? Okay. But there are three things out here. First is in Sunfoot, and Nityanand has, done this data. If you see all the drivers who lost a position on the opening lap at the start were all the odd starting drivers, or I think number
the ones
8,
on the racing line.
The ones on the racing line.
Yeah.
No, the ones on the outside, on the racing line.
Okay.
Yeah. So the ones who should have theoretically had better grip off the line and a better launch were the ones who went backwards. So this includes Norris and, of course, PS3 as well, right? But also includes, I think, can't remember who was 7th. Carlos Sainz went backward. No, he was 10th, right? Either way, they were all, and I actually, since I've said this, why don't I just open up that tweet where he's done this and tell you who all actually went backwards, because I know Nityanand's worked very hard on this. Okay, so Norris starting P1 went backwards, PS3, P3 went backwards, Perez P5 went backwards, Alonso P7 went backwards, Sonoda P11 went backwards, and Ocon P15 went backwards. So these are all of those who went back by one grid slot. But it gets better. Zhou Guanyu, P17, went backwards to 2 positions. And then Daniel Ricciardo, P13, went backwards 2 positions. And then there was just an exception in Lance Stroll, who started P8, but still thought that maybe everyone was going backwards around him, so I need to go backwards as well. So he decided to probably go backwards, but maybe he just got stuck in traffic, right? But why don't we do this? Do you think Lando Norris is going to have a normal start in Monza? And let's split it down into 3. Let's split it down into 3. Like a great start would mean he takes a position. Normal start would mean that he holds position, and a bad start would mean he loses position. What do you think he's doing, Sundaram?
I'm saying, I always like going the other way, so I'm going to say that he's not going to be losing a position in Monza for a change.
So you're saying he'll have a good start.
He'll start from pole. He'll hold on to pole after the first turn.
And I'm in a bit of a space where Sundaram normally is, because I want a stat or a record to continue. I don't have anything against Lando. I just want to see more things added to the trend. So that's why I'm going to say a bad start. But hey, no, seriously, it's a problem they or he need to solve, because if it's a McLaren thing, it's a serious issue. I mean, maybe it could be that the gearing or the clutches are in such a way that it doesn't let them lay down all the power. I don't know. It's maybe marginal efficiencies here and there. For all you know, just putting it out
How
there.
is it that PS3 is not got such a stat? How is it that PS3 is making decent enough starts? We've got to ask ourselves that question.
He had a tough one this weekend, a bad start and also a bad weekend. But yeah, you're so right. He's not had such bad starts as Lando has, Sundaram.
No, if you actually, I actually like the theory that Kunal mentioned over here, about the drivers on the racing line losing position, because during the replay of the race start, they also showed the AWS graphic, and hopefully that's very accurate, because it showed that Norris and Verstappen had the exact same reaction time of, I think, 0.28 seconds. So both of them were on the throttle at the very same time, but the application of that and giving the sort of grip that the tires are able to generate at that point of time was probably the differentiating factor, which then affected acceleration. And that's where I think Norris lost like a 3 tenths to Verstappen. So grip on the racing line was probably that much lesser than off the racing line, considering all the rain over the past couple of days as well.
On Viaplay, we actually played Norris's onboard camera at the start. There was a bit of a wheel spin that you could sense there. So that could probably be what Sundaram is also alluding to, which is maybe there was some grip level. I think there was some overnight rain, etc. And usually these things can just affect different parts of the circuit as they would. But great trend that we picked up in Viaplay, which Nityanand is now substantiated with data, has even extrapolated further, saying he wasn't just 1357 as he spoke on Viaplay. It was pretty much all the even grid odd grid starters out there. But my feeling is Lando Norris's start in Monza. Okay, let me do this. He's going to bottle the start in some way. He might still keep, I think he's either pole, front row, whatever he has. But what he'll do is he's going to bunch up that grid even more, given how tight turns 1 and 2 are in Monza. Okay. And that's probably what's going to happen, I would say.
Now then, that's one half of the story, because Red Bull are the other half of it. As much as McLaren did well, Red Bull had a tough weekend. I'm just intrigued to see what Monza will be like, because as I mentioned earlier, apart from Mexico City, this is one of the last different circuits that McLaren needs to conquer this year. If they can do well at Monza, they can do well consistently at other major circuits of the year. It's a extreme circuit in that regard. And so for McLaren, beating Red Bull there will be key. And I am just considering what the mood is like within Red Bull at this point, because when I heard the radio message that GP said to Max, and what Max responded as well, it went along the lines of, yeah, P2 is what we expected, so good job in getting that done. Acceptance of P2 is a weird place to be, Kunal, and that's not the Red Bull we're all aware of, that we all know of. So maybe the window of operation of that car is now getting even more limited as this concept of regulations keeps on getting further onto the extreme of performance.
I think adding performance is definitely not as easy without taking away the drivability of the car, which is what almost every driver has complained about. Yeah. And often we've seen that if a driver is more comfortable in a car, even though it doesn't have as much performance, they're able to extract more lap time. So this is again one of those proofs that drivers do make a difference in the car, right? That's point number one. The second point, of course, is I think this is a matured Max Verstappen, Red Bull, Helmut, Christian. Everyone would know that, listen, these 2 titles, at least, okay, the Drivers' Championship is in the bag. Okay. If it means that we take P2, P3, P4, P2, P3, P4, and just finish this season with a championship win, but at the same time keep running some experiments as they did in as they did in Zandvoort, to understand where they were actually going wrong. Now, these experiments would either allow them to make certain car changes in 2024 itself, or they could hold them all back and say, we'll put it on the 25 car, because they all know the weaknesses. Their rivals know the weaknesses as well. So I get a feeling like we said a couple of episodes ago, what margin will Max win this by, and when does it start to get nervous? At 70 points. At 70 points, he's not nervous. But at 20 points, could he be nervous? Last couple of rounds of the season, he's, unable to get things going in that car. Red Bull is unable to get things going. He's P3, P5, midfield, some tighter corners. He gets nudged. He spins around. Something like that. It could happen. It happened to Michael Schumacher in 2000, I remember. Had a lead, but just in the middle of the season, kept getting knocked out by rivals for no fault of his.
Similar in MotoGP 2022, when Yamaha had reached the end of their development cycle, Ducati started to explore new boundaries, which is similar to what McLaren are doing now. Following years, Yamaha were nowhere, Ducati were on the very top. In that title, Fabio Quartararo led by, I think, around over 30, 40 points at one stage of the season. Bagnaia eventually won with a one round to spare. It's a possibility. It's happened in MotoGP before, just a couple of years ago, with a similar trend. It could happen in Formula One too, Sundaram.
I really want to answer this question firstly. Can Lando Norris actually win the driver's title? In all honesty, I would say no. I think Verstappen's won it, but mathematically, that's still very much possible. I also saw a stat yesterday that said if Norris wins all the next races and Verstappen just finishes P2, then Norris is clinching the title. And it's going to take us back to 2013 then, because that's how Sebastian Vettel ended the season with 9 consecutive wins. At the mid-season break, Vettel at that point had a 30-point margin over the second place driver. But after 9 races, that amplified to 150. So if Norris has to win this championship, he's going to reach probably another further step, if there is one, to go and topple Max Verstappen, which I feel is very, very difficult to kind of preempt at this point. If it happens, I think it's going to be one of the greatest seasons that we see. But the second thing is, like Kunal very correctly pointed out, are we going to see a different driving style for Max Verstappen in the second half of the season? Knowing that probably he's not going to win, is he finally going to settle for a second or third? Because he knows consistent points is going to be very key for him. And that's not the Max Verstappen way of driving. He always has to go for that win. It's do or die. Is he going to compromise that and say, I need this P2, I need this P3. If I can't go for P1, I need to stay on the podium.
I get a feeling he already showed glimpses of that in Zandvoort. There's only a handful number of races where Max Verstappen has not fought while giving up the lead of a race. Literally, he could have had the third or the fourth fastest car, but he would have fought. And this is not because Lando Norris is his friend, but because he's probably just realized, I need those 18 points as much as I'm getting them. And look at it this way, in the second or the third fastest car, Max finished second. Theoretically, he should have been third, at least, or fourth, or worse, fifth, depending on how Ferrari eventually performed. And in Monza, one other challenge that Red Bull Racing will face, apart from just McLaren, are curbs. And riding those curbs is so critical to lap time. We've seen how they do everything they need to avoid riding those curbs. In Zandvoort, they've gone back to Bahrain spec floors, and they've done so many different tests on their car, and it seemed that Perez's floor was actually quicker by a couple of tenths a lap than Max Verstappen, and that probably explains why I think after their pit stops there were just 2 laps, so say the 40 laps towards the end, so more than 50% of the race, lap 42 and lap 62, just 2 laps when Max Verstappen was actually quicker than Lando Norris. On every other lap, it was Lando Norris who was quicker. So we have to also take this gap with a pinch of salt, because Max was running a car, running lots of experiments. Red Bull were compromised a lot more, and that compromise actually made them fall away from P1 closer to P3, but still gave them P2 in both the title championships.
If you're already talking about Monza and wondering who could be winning there, at this point, I think we have to talk about operating windows over here, because a team's or our car's actual pace or true pace can be calculated across multiple types of areas. So you can say slow speed, high speed, medium speed, and you look like low fuel, high fuel loads. You look at temperatures. So there are various areas through which a car can actually be fast or slow. And we've all often spoken about how Mercedes' operating window is very, very narrow, because it's very difficult for them to find that right sweet spot of conditions and then also finding the right setup. So at this point, looking at how McLaren did in Zandvoort, especially losing out on the lead, but the car has such a wide operating window that they still have that pace to come back and grasp P1. So they did exceptionally well across tracks like Miami and Hungary, but they also did very well in Belgium as well. So if that is the case, then I would really feel that Monza is a track where McLaren can go one step further and show that, we can conquer any type of track.
Yeah. And to just add to that point, McLaren was so confident of their pace that with Oscar Piastri, who we've of course not spoken of, who got robbed of a podium finish, who was treated as a stepchild or whatever you call that, because he lost position to Russell and he was driving at Russell's pace, and then he was given a not so optimal pit stop strategy because Leclerc just jumped him and Russell in the pits. The undercut was so powerful. But McLaren were very confident, saying, oh, you're just going to have to overtake them on track. And usually we don't get to see that happening as often, right? And did McLaren really make a mistake there? And I certainly believe so, because they could have, when they'll look back and they'll think, did we optimize the result with both cars? And that's when they'll probably feel maybe we did not. In fact, I had this thought, could they have even double stacked? Because I remember seeing the gap between the two drivers. It was 12 seconds or thereabouts. That's enough for a Formula One team to double stack if they really needed to. Because, like I said, Oscar Piastri lost position to George Russell, and then he was further back. He was not in the fight with Max and Lando. He was in the fight with Russell, and he was just stuck behind Russell at that point before he could eventually do anything to his own race.
And probably a good point to even mention Charles Leclerc right now. He was in fifth, if I'm not wrong, and Piastri was in third. And the gaps were so small that the undercut worked so well for him, and they switched to the hards, and he was able to get that hard tire switched on so quickly. Sure, the track characteristics also really help. It's very abrasive. It's high on the it's very, what do you say, hard on the tires as well. But his outlap was so good, and there I think credit has to be given to Leclerc's outlap as well. It was so good that he was able to make not one but two positions up, and Russell had a slow pit stop. I think it was 3.4 seconds. But even if it was a second lower, I think Leclerc would have still passed him. So that just goes to show how well Ferrari did in terms of strategy and execution after that pit stop as well.
It's a good point to come to Ferrari now. And it's funny. It really is. With Ferrari, it's always funny. They are now picking up the expectations before Monza. It always happens. Be it one of their bigger races, be it Monaco or Monza, they always start low and then eventually build up the drama and over-deliver over there. We saw this. We saw this with Monaco as well. Limited expectations coming in. Charles Leclerc pole gets that win. The year before that, before Monza, there was a bit of a sad mood around it. Carlos Sainz comes in, takes pole position. They get one of their best weekends with P3 and P4. And I get a similar vibe this time around as well, where them saying that they were surprised about their performance, I'm not sure if it's a ploy, which seems very much like it. But if there is a time to come alive, it is now. And it's a funny trend because Ferrari, I remember until last year, had this situation where they were stronger in qualifying than in the race. Whereas it's now been a couple of times that their race pace has been slightly better than their qualifying pace, which is a fun place to be. I know they've worked on the way the car manages the tires and degradation a lot better, so that could be giving them the advantages. But one of their problems, from what I read, was also porpoising. Monza is one of the flatter circuits where, again, it doesn't impact you as much because you're also going low downforce setups in that regard. So things are aligning for them to have a good performance back at home.
Question for you guys. Who is going to be the most popular Ferrari driver in Monza?
Lewis Hamilton. Without a doubt. Is that even a question? No, I think Carlos Sainz will become the stepchild now. Unfortunately, I hate it.
Yeah, and the Tifosi is going to already embrace him. And like I said, I think I said this in the Sunfood preview, could Mercedes almost just announce Andrea Kimi Antonelli at Monza? Because, of course, it's his home race, but it'll also sort of take the shine away from this whole Lewis Hamilton leaving Mercedes to go to Ferrari.
Cut in.
Tifosi
Haven't they already
celebrating.
sort of done that by putting him in the FP1 for that session? It's sort of a nudge in that direction, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a nudge. In fact, Toto Wolff just said it. We need to have a good car for George and Kimi next year. And then, of course, he added that it was hypothetically. So he had the tongue of slip, as you would say, instead of the slip of tongue, right? Yeah, it's pretty much confirmed. But the strange news from the Dutch Grand Prix was that Toto Wolff felt it was imperative for him to say that he met with Team Verstappen in the summer break. And when Max Verstappen was asked about this, he said, "What meeting?" Okay, and he left it at that. So interesting to see what is actually happening. Christian Horner said, we know there are performance clauses. We know if we eventually what those clauses are, and we need to keep having a competitive car if we want to keep Max. So it is now pretty much out in the open that Red Bull needs to have a very competitive car so that they don't lose out on Max Verstappen, even though he has signed all the way till 2028. That's pretty much the most obvious thing that's doing the rounds now.
And now, with Red Bull having their tense dip in form, with Mercedes now somewhat finding an operating window, Zandvoort would have been such a hard hit for them because Russell barely could find any pace. Hamilton had all the pace in the world coming up. It's a weird, conflicting little thing where maybe it was a bit too hot for their car to work. I don't know. Have we got down to the bottom of what that is, Kunal? Because I've been trying to read and find out, but I've been clueless to how Lewis was better coming through, but George didn't have as much pace compared to the others where he was in the middle of the pack.
They just had a pace deficit. They just had a car which they weren't comfortable with. They had everyone had lack of dry running. So Mercedes, just can you imagine, in the top 8 teams, top 8 finishes were all taken by the top 4 teams. You had Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes. Mercedes was the only team in the top 10 that needed to do 2 pit stops to complete the race. Okay, with both their drivers, they actually used all 3 tire compounds to finish the race. And I know there's this whole narrative. Lewis said, if I started in George's place, I would have at least finished there or higher. Well, the truth is, Lewis was fighting cars that were slower than him, even though he was starting from P14. He drove a fantastic first half of the race on that soft tire. Made a lot of overtakes, including overtakes into turn 11, which is literally my favorite. Nobody talks about it because turn 3 and turn 14 are like, the pinnacle of all corners in Formula One, right? With all the banking and the high speed stuff that they allow. He pulled off some moves into turn 11, which I thought were pretty cool. And then Lewis just hit a plateau because everyone else ahead of him were the quicker cars, including George Russell, who may not have been quicker, but just had track position at that point. And George Russell had to pit, otherwise he would have been overtaken by Carlos Sainz on that lap itself. So literally it was just down to them not having the pace and hence going through tires faster and hence needing to do one more pit stop. It was just that. But the connection between Red Bull not performing, Mercedes not performing, and who's Max Verstappen going to choose, I think Zandvoort would have just given that much more confidence to Max, saying, yeah, it's good, let Kimi go and check if that car's quick or not. I can just decide to go whenever, and then they'll get rid of George.
I think we've already kind of established that. I think Max doesn't really have to worry. We've said this before as well. Whenever Max Verstappen wants to put himself on the market, there will be takers for him. But I like where this championship is going. Mercedes was the team that had won the last 3 of the last 4 races, and we felt that, okay, they're back in the championship. Lewis Hamilton is back. That car has pace. Suddenly, McLaren is also back. Ferrari is also back. And it seemed like Mercedes has had a bad weekend. I absolutely love this. 4 different teams, a bunch of different drivers. Anyone on the day is seeming like they could go and win the race. We can't even say who's going to be winning in Monza at this rate.
Of course
we do predictions. Why don't we do predictions? Who do you guys think
Oscar
is
Piastri.
winning?
Oscar Piastri.
There we go.
Very clearly. Has to be him.
Sommel's very persistent. He's sticking on to Piastri. Okay. I'm switching sides today. So I'm going to Norris, which possibly means that Verstappen's going to be winning. So I'll stick with Norris.
Okay. I think it's a McLaren win. I think it's probably going to be Piastri as well. I think he's going to just bounce back harder. And if they run 1 and 2, what is McLaren going to do? Are they going to ask for some team orders to let Lando Norris? Because they've still not said we're going to prioritize Norris in the championship.
Yeah.
And
as long as they don't let them battle, I think I'm happy.
I want to see a battle on track. I don't want people to be told hold positions.
I don't think so. McLaren should be letting their drivers battle. This might be a controversial opinion, but I think McLaren's priority has to be the constructors' title. If that means...
But then even more, right? Saying go battle. But in fact, both, Oscar Piastri was asked, are you going to help Lando Norris win the race in Zandvoort? And he said, no, I'm going to go win my race.
Exactly.
We've been told you can race so long as you don't crash. So I would say the same thing. Please go race. Please do not fix positions by saying hold positions, Oscar, hold positions, Lando, whatever. Please go race. Just don't crash and you will still get a 1-2. We don't care who's the first driver finishing so long as there's a battle for it and not a radio message for it.
Otherwise, what would be the difference between the old and the new McLaren, right?
I don't know. I really don't know, because I'm sure these are the same guidelines that were given to Hamilton and Rosberg back in the day, but only considering how many few races we have, which is 9 races, and McLaren having a deficit of 30 points, you never know when Red Bull could be back on form, and then McLaren starts bleeding points as well. Which is why I feel if McLaren finds itself in a 1-2 shut shop, to ask them to hold position and come back in without having a fight, which is why I feel they really need to close the gap, then build an advantage, and then they have to win the Constructors' title. It's not just a matter of 30 points. They need more than 30 points to win that Constructors' title. So I don't think they can afford to have both their drivers battling it out on track.
Sundaram, you better just never join any Formula One team.
I don't think
all
so.
the
I am.
entertainment for
I don't
us,
think
dude.
so. I am.
I'm saying go battle all you can. Just no nudging the wheels, no whatever. Just keep it clean as one would. But anyway, that just goes.
But
to
does
see,
it often happen when you give out that directive? Keep it clean. Does it always end that way? Is the question. It doesn't.
I mean,
right?
more often than not, it has, right?
Yeah.
If you see 2016 after 2016, and if you take Esteban Ocon out of the equation, most teammates have actually.
That is true.
Most teammates have kept it clean, and they manage. They know they're pieces of a larger puzzle. At least that's what they keep being told, even if they are the most highest paid employees and the most visible employees or whatever. But let's see, because I talking of all the 4 teams, it's literally a 10th or 10th and a half. If they just find that within their operating window, then suddenly there are more teams in the mix. And Alpine was in the mix.
Yes.
In Zandvoort. Pierre Gasly drove a fabulous race to 9th place. That's a lot of points for them.
Yeah.
This is after having Oliver Oaks, after having the genius of F1 join them. And this is after having Esteban Ocon going out in Q1 and telling his team, please listen to me. This car is not drivable. I'm almost crashing every lap. This is not the kind of competitiveness, whatever. So he was complaining. And on the other end, Pierre Gasly delivered a Q3 and then he delivered points. And Alpine's press release mentioned nothing about Esteban Ocon's problems. They were just singing praises of Gasly and how good they feel and so on. So I think that story is just going to end in this bitter way, if at all.
So no conspiracy theories of sabotage right now?
No.
At this stage of Alpine's life, if they sabotage their own car, then they're definitely going out of business. They need to sell off and go, because they have only a few chances to score points, and then you'd rather have both your. I mean, the only way you make money, the only way you get sponsors, the only way you get paid by Formula One or get paid more by Formula One for racing in Formula One is by scoring points. And then the best way to score points is to have both cars having enough of an opportunity to score points.
But it's kind of worked out like a typical corporate job. You have a new boss and you want to impress the new boss straight away. And in that sense, it's kind of worked perfectly for Pierre Gasly, qualifying P10, getting a couple of positions up on the opening lap. Great battles with, Sainz, Hamilton, Albon. New boss is happy. Ocon's on the other end of the grid, struggling with the car. So yeah, we've chosen the right guy for 2025.
But who made the driver choice? Why don't we I have a fantastic anecdote that came up in Zandvoort. Jack Doohan, of course, confirmed as the teammate to Pierre Gasly for only 2025, which means 2026, it's an open book, at least right now, for that second seat. Jack was asked, who made the call to you to tell you the news? Now, this is something any human on earth would remember. Who made the call? Was it somebody who spoke English without an Italian accent, or somebody who spoke English with an Italian accent? Was it somebody who called himself a genius of Formula One, or was it somebody who did not call him a genius of Formula One? And he just dodged the question. He's like, you know what? I actually don't remember it. I just love the news and I don't remember it. And I was like, yeah, that's clearly, is Flavio Briatore calling the shots, and did Jack Doohan not want to give it away? And is Oliver Oaks hired to just get operational efficiency going for Alpine on the track and the engineering side of things? Could very well be so.
I wouldn't be surprised. Well, if you consider what Flavio already said about this very seat a couple of weeks ago, he said it doesn't matter who's in the seat for 2025. It'll only matter when the car is good who the driver is. So might well be Flavio just filling a few gaps to figure it out. Could well be the truth. He's sort of partially given it away now. Well,
Lots of partial giveaways, including Formula One letting go of almost, some 1 million shares, I believe, to get to raise capital to partially fund their MotoGP purchase.
yes, that's true.
Yeah.
True. And also Williams partially giving away any hopes remaining of Logan Sargent being their driver for this season and beyond after that crash. Well,
Interesting
let's
topic.
just go to Williams now for a second. This is meant to be like the Williams golden run. Belgium, Zandvoort, and Monza. They always do well here. I mean, Zandvoort was a bit of a bonus addition since last year, but Belgium and Monza have always been their two good tracks going back to the start of this regulation. And look at the opportunities. Have they made the best of it in 2/3 of it? Very clearly, no. Had it not been for that floor being slightly a bit too wide, we could have well had an Alex Albon train instead of a Kevin Magnussen train in the middle of that race. But there's an air of optimism, Kunal, because this time last year, Alex Albon qualified sixth in Williams in Monza. So with that new flow clearly working, they'll have to trim it off a little bit, clearly. But there is an air of optimism, and Williams are a team that I particularly will have a keen eye on in whatever little time we will have this weekend to watch Formula One. I say whatever little time for a reason, because this weekend in Chennai, there is a street race underneath the lights. Like the Marina Bay circuit, we now have the Marina Beach circuit in Chennai. So Sundaram and I will be there. Yeah, we have to plug it.
Everybody tuning in from Chennai can actually go meet Saumil and Sundaram at the Marina Beach circuit in Chennai.
I really have to mention this. Someone turned up at the circuit. I mean, so I'm sure it's one of our listeners as well, or one of our followers on social media page. Someone walked up to me. I'm like extremely happy knowing that someone has recognized me trackside, and they're like, "Are you Saumil?" I'm like, "No, that's not me. Saumil's in the broadcast room." But then and that's where I start getting a little disappointed. But then he's like, no, wait. I know you. You are the stats guy. I'm like, yes, finally you've recognized me. So people know the both of us, even trackside.
Hey, it's 2 years in a row, actually. We've had a few listeners meet us last year in Chennai as well, for in the middle of that race. So it's good to see our community growing southwards as well now.
Absolutely. And everyone listening in from Chennai, by all means, go catch Saumil and Sundaram. You can see who looks how on social media. But it's actually difficult to say because both of y'all are specs, both of y'all have a beard and a mustache and pretty similar aerodynamic cut. So
it's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
Given the popularity of the podcast, they recognize your voices better than your faces. That's probably where it is. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But where were we? We were on
Williams.
Yeah, before we go to Williams, you mentioned something very interesting. Kevin Magnussen DRS train. For once, we actually did not have a single DRS train in Zandvoort. And I absolutely loved that. Okay, and then we had that moment where there were 5 cars going into turn 1, and Kevin Magnussen, Ricardo Zonta probably has that nightmare from 2000 Belgian Grand Prix where, he's driving onto the Kemmel Straight at the Spa-Francorchamps, and Michael Schumacher passes him on the left, and Mika Häkkinen goes in on the right, and he's suddenly like, whoops, I just got sandwiched and overtaken. Kevin Magnussen was in a double-layered sandwich. He had 4 cars, 2 on each side, drive through him like he didn't exist. Okay, and of course, he was on a different tire strategy, whatever. But I loved that. Typically, it could well be in Monza. We're all stuck in a DRS train. Could very well be so. But Zandvoort didn't offer us that DRS train, which I absolutely loved. And Kevin Magnussen, by the way, it's not come out yet, was very, very cheeky. He was driving slowly in the slower parts of the circuit in Zandvoort to let Nico Hülkenberg pull out a bit of a gap. And he actually did that a couple of times to Alex Albon, who was very furious. Maybe in the next few days, these stories might come out as content unravels a lot more from the Dutch Grand Prix.
It's just classic Kevin Magnussen, isn't it? And that battle just put a smile to my face when I was watching, knowing that, this is the peak midfield that we all know and love. It's amazing. But we should then come back to Williams because part of that train was Alex Albon. And that question is still circling in my head. Should I or should I not put my money on Albon this weekend? I'm going to back him. He's my third favorite driver in Formula One now. Has to be, at least for 25 and 26, with an option to extend. So what would you do now, Kunal?
I would put money on Williams. They delivered fabulously well in Sunfoot, especially Albon with that qualifying. And, more often than not, he always delivers. That's the beauty of him. And James Vowles has been very, very impressed with Albon. The interesting question is who's going to take that second seat? Will they actually give it to Logan Sargent? Or will they give it to Mick Schumacher? And if they give it to a Mick Schumacher, why have they given it to Mick Schumacher?
Yeah.
Because 2025, there are no opportunities, at least at Williams, with Mick Schumacher. But I'd love to see the Schumacher name back. I know we had Christian Danner on the show a few months ago, and we all said we'd love to see Mick having a second go. And then the other option could be Liam Lawson, or could Gabriel Bortoleto. I wonder if Williams is putting a bid on the seat saying, $2 million for the next 9 races. Who's bidding more money? And then there's an auction that goes on for that particular seat.
Luca Badoer? Anyone? No.
Sorry?
Nobody for Luca Badoer. Okay. Good. Good.
I think 15 years too late. No, sorry. More than 15. He was already 10 years too late at that point. So, yeah.
Pedro Della Rosa is still always around if you need him to.
Even Nico
Or
Hulkenberg
Mika
has a
Häkkinen.
seat now. Who are they going to put there?
I'd love to see Mick Schumacher get a run, and then he impresses enough to get the Audi seat. And I don't know if Mattia Binotto, who dropped him from Ferrari, will actually hire him in Audi or not. But some of those things. But
Who do you want, Somil? Who do you want in that second seat? If at all they're replacing Logan.
Just keep Logan, man. We have 2 minutes for him in every episode. Otherwise, we'll have to tell you some boring stuff about Nico Hulkenberg or whatever it might be, or how he started 7th and dropped down to 11th. Keep Logan, dude. We get to talk about one crash every 3-4 weekends. So I like that.
the reason why they actually don't want Logan is he goes and crashes Alexander Albon's T car. That's the reason why they don't want to keep Logan. For our new Formula One fans, the T car is actually the spare car. Back in time, you were allowed to have 3 cars readied for a weekend, which meant that if one of your drivers actually crashed the car, you could run back and drive the spare car. For cost reasons, now you cannot have a spare car. You cannot have a T car. It's always only 2 cars, right? And in Williams' case, if Albon crashes a car and is not able to race, guess whose car he gets? Logan Sargent's.
And we're not making this up. It's actually happened now. So
Australia.
Yeah, exactly. We're not even making this up now.
But I know we're close to 50 minutes in, but we have to talk of the legend of Monza, because that Temple of Speed circuit is something else. We're going to see the Formula One cars shed off all the drag they can. It's it's like a catwalk. If a model gets ready for a catwalk, you just want to shed off everything that doesn't look good on you, right? That's the same thing with Formula One. They're going to shed off all that drag to go as quick as they can, because it's 77% of the circuit is all full throttle.
Yeah.
The toe in qualifying is going to be one of the first things they're going to look out for, everyone. And, this is a very power sensitive circuit. Even the slightest of power advantage gives you a lap time. And here's a funny one. So it's race week, of course, but Haas was held back from leaving for Monza. Okay, and I know Sean Kelly, the other stat man, as he calls himself, had a beautiful tweet. He said, typically sponsors paid teams so that they could go racing. Now teams have paid a sponsor so they could go racing. So Haas will show up in Monza.
I want to talk about that for a second. It was so clever of Viral Kali to file a complaint against Haas in Netherlands. They didn't file it in the EU code. They filed a complaint in Netherlands so that by the time the Dutch GP could come around, they could deliberately force them to keep their equipment in Netherlands if they didn't pay them off. That is a genius tactic, by the way. Just about
especially in a doubleheader.
In a doubleheader, exactly. That's some level of planning they must have done. Like it's good Warcraft.
Yeah.
I like that.
I've just realized that I've not dropped a single stat. And I call myself the F1 stats guru, but maybe I should do that right now before we move.
For it.
So, does anyone remember when was the last time you saw Bernd Maylander on the track? It's been a while, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's been 6 races. We've not seen Bernd Maylander. turn up on track for a full safety car period. We've had one virtual safety car period, I think, 4 races before. But that's the longest absence for him in F1 in 15 years. It's the last time he had such a long break in the paddock was in 2009, 2010. So I'm really looking forward to see if he makes the comeback onto the track in Monza.
Wow. And wasn't this also the second time all 10 finishers were former race winners? Two back-to-back races that we had that.
Yeah. Oh, nice. That's also a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. Incredible. Wow. What
So
else
then-
have you got for us? Monza. Last 12 races. I love this. 6 have been won from pole, 9 from front row. That's all I always keep getting, but nothing outside of the top 10, despite all that overtaking that everyone dreams of in Monza.
You know, if I remember correctly, or I remember checking this back in Monaco, but I think we've had more races won from pole at Monza than at Monaco. I have to check the numbers once again. So it's either more or it's just as much as race wins taken from pole in Monaco.
In fact, talking of race wins from pole, it's the first time in 7 races that a pole sitter actually won the race.
And the first time in 7 races that the winning margin has been more than 4 seconds.
Yeah. And the longest winning margin of this ground effects rule era in Formula One. It's not Red Bull who had it, but it's McLaren who's had it. And wow, legendary stuff. Anything else that you've got, Mr. F1 Stats Guru?
No, just the fact that it's taken McLaren 12 years to win a race from pole position and 12 years for them to see a driver take a hat-trick as well, which is great to see. The last one to do that was Lewis Hamilton in Interlagos 2012. It's been a long time for McLaren, considering this team literally put their factory on sale just 3 years ago, which was leased back to them. And they were in their, I think, one of the worst slumps barely 10 years ago. Not many sponsors. Zach Brown comes in, hires 2 young drivers, and look at the trajectory since then. Look at the progression since the last 3 years. It's incredible to see McLaren having so much of pace against a team like Red Bull. It's very heartening to see this.
And for once, they come to a circuit where they've won at before after a long time.
Yes, exactly. But not with Norris. That's one.
Not with Norris.
That's one streak for him to break out now, to overcome that and maybe get that big win in Monza. Let's see.
Yeah. And what else about Monza have we got? Lovely corner names as well, Ascari and Lesmos and...
Long-lasting corners. Parabolica. That's McLaren's strength, by the way.
Haven't they named it the Michel Alboreto corner or something? We should stick to Parabolica. I think.
Yeah, there is the Alboreto corner, but Parabolica is a long right-hander. And guess where McLaren are generally very good? Long corners. That's their strength, apparently. So that's going to be interesting, where they've got one corner that works for them, slower corners where the high downforce Red Bull setup may not be as efficient because they're running low downforce because it's a long straight kind of thing. It's going to be a weird little combination to see which team can nail Monza. And Monza being such an extreme in that way, it's just hard to tell who's going to be winning. So our predictions that we gave earlier, they're going to be really up in the air. That'll be good.
Yeah. So what else have you got? Any memories from Monza?
Quite a few. Particularly
Hamilton, Verstappen.
I was trying not to come to that.
He was trying, exactly.
Leclerc, Hamilton.
But I mean, for me particularly, Sainz's podium last year and the pole in particular. I want to see.
Of course, you're going to mention that.
Of course, last chance for me, right? Last chance for him in a Ferrari. Let's just really see to what extent have Ferrari optimized their Monza package, because we know they do that. It's not even a secret anymore. Every single year, they just have to be the best at Monza. And I'm just intrigued to see just how good they will be. And that for me is the one thing that you really should be watching for. Guys, one more thing from your end before we get to the end of this episode. What's one more thing that you'd like to keep a keen eye on Monza? Sundaram, why don't you go first? If you had to pick one.
I'm going after Kunal. I need a minute.
I get a feeling that the top 4 teams are going to be closer than ever before. Because this is where you pull all the downforce, all the drag off the car and go as quick as you can. So we're going to see some really... it's a short lap, as we know. We're going to see some really close margins as well. And it's also going to be a very short race because it's typically always 1 hour 10 minutes, 1 hour 15, 20 minutes, whatever. So it's going to be one of those.
It's usually the fastest race of the calendar.
Yeah, temple of speed and whatever and stuff. So I get a feeling it's going to be top four teams absolutely going hammer and tongs, a tenth away from each other or thereabouts. And Ferrari, who of course love Monza because of the Tifosi, have got 23 poles and 19 race wins out here. So they've got a fantastic record. But I get a feeling McLaren is going to be the one who's going to be chased this weekend as well.
I also want to see if track limits plays any part this weekend, especially on. I mean, I remember we spoke so much about the lap that gets deleted whenever a driver goes off track. Is it going to be that lap? Is it going to also be the next lap? So that's also a case that they might end up seeing in qualifying with drivers going slightly off track on the exit to the main straight. So that could possibly lead their next lap also getting deleted. That and just seeing how easily people can overtake around Monza. It is a very quick track. It's a fast track, but overtaking can be difficult at times because it's quite narrower than other circuits as well. So I'm looking forward to that.
And I'm looking forward to Red Bull and how much they will struggle on those curbs in Ascari specifically. Yeah. I don't get a good feeling about that because they were avoiding the curbs in that chicane in Hungaroring. This is pretty similar to that, just faster. In fact, even turns 1 and 2 and then turns 4 and 5 and whatever. Yeah.
But last question, Kunal, are you on TV this weekend as well?
Yeah. Yes, on Sunday, F2 sweet. And F1.
So all of us are on TV once again. So something for you people to look out to.
Wait, and I think also at the same time, because I think when we're doing racing clashes with Formula One, unfortunately. So, we could be all on TV at the same time. Well, more for you to watch, folks. And more for you to watch also on the podcast in a few days' time. Because as we mentioned, the guest who's coming is going to be a big one. He's a big fish. He will have some fun things to say. And he will be on the podcast in a couple of days and you can listen to him there. We won't tell you who. I think you'll find out shortly. So stay tuned, subscribe to the podcast. Thank you for listening and watching. And we will see you in a couple of days' time. Bye-bye.